If you'd like to see how I turn this into this, stay tuned and watch the video. My neighbor Jim asked me if I'd make him a hall table for his living room area. He had a specific spot in mind for it, so it kind of dictated the width, the height, and the length of the table. He wanted it made out of oak, which was fine with me. So I like working with oak. He wanted it to inlay some tile on top of it so it would match a coffee table that he has. And he also wanted it to kind of match the color of an antique chest of drawers that he has in his living room area. So with all that in mind, I made a few sketches, and Jim and I agreed on a design. I went to my hardwood dealer and picked up some red oak, and then I proceeded to make Jim's table. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I did all that. So stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy the video. I went to my hardwood supplier and picked up this 5/4 red oak for this project. It's looking pretty rough now, but it's going to clean up nice. I like to buy it in the rough like this and clean it up. I think that's the fun part of making these projects. I want to lay out one of the legs on the end of this blank. When I went to my hardwood supplier, I was looking to get some 8/4 red oak. Unfortunately, they decided that they wouldn't cut me a piece to the length I needed, and he offered me a 8/4 by 10 inch wide by 12 foot long piece of red oak, which was way more than I need for any of this project. So I declined the offer and decided to glue up some pieces to make the legs. What I did was I took two pieces, face jointed them, glued them together, and the grain is actually going like this in this piece. So what we need is, what I want is the grain to go corner to corner on the leg. So I made a template that's 1.5 inches square. I did draw a 45-degree angle line right here because I want to make sure that I can actually make that first cut on either my table saw or the bandsaw. So the goal is to have the grain going from corner to corner like that. So let's move it over. I could move it all the way to the 45 degrees, and then we'd have grain going like that, which looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do then is I'll take my pen and I'm going to mark around the spot about, doesn't have to be exact. So there's where the we're going to cut this leg out of that piece of wood. It is fairly wasteful on this one. The board wasn't wide enough for me to get two pieces out of it, but I was able to get more than one piece out of some of the others. It didn't come out too bad. But so next thing to do is take this to, I think I'll use the bandsaw. We'll take it to the bandsaw. We'll make one of these cuts, cut that piece off, and then once we do that, then everything else is 90-degree cuts, and we can do all those on the table saw. Before I go to the table saw, I'm going to need one flat side here, so I set the bandsaw table to line up with one of the edges of the leg, and it's just a matter of trimming that piece off, keeping the leg blank tight to the table and tight to the fence. At the table saw, I just have this fence set so I cut on the outside edge of that leg. It was pretty heavy cut there with all that wood, but I have a thin kerf rip blade in the saw there, so I just have to readjust the fence a couple of times and we can trim these three sides off and wind up with a blank that's almost square. need two edges that are flat and square to each other, so the best tool to do that is a joiner, so that's what we're doing here. To clean up the other two faces, I'm just running them through the drum sander. You could also use a planer, but this drum sander is a lot quieter than the planer, so I thought it was a good choice to do this. We didn't really have to take off all that much. Well, trimming the rails was pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of cutting them to width, and then I'll run them through the joiner to clean up that edge. I leave the blank a little oversized, maybe a 32nd, and I just take a 32nd off at the joiner. So let's see, how did it come out? All right. Well, I just used my miter gauge and a stop block to cut the rails to length. We're going to put this table together with some pocket holes. So I have my pocket hole jig screwed to a piece of plywood here. This is an older, one of the older Craig jigs, but it still works fine. I got it set up on dust collection, so I got quite a few pocket holes to drill, so I want to make sure I remove the chips so they don't interfere with it. I got a stop here to set the distance. What I'm doing is I'm going to do the short ones first, or the narrow rails for the shelf. I've already drilled the this is the bottom shelf support rail, and it's very short because this is not a very wide table. So what I've done, I put that on there with the up against the stop, and then I drilled the holes out just to make sure I was getting everything where I wanted it. So I'm going to do that. What I have left to do is the one of the long rails, and then I have the wider top rails to do as well. But one of the main things I can do wrong on this is to drill it on the wrong side of the board. So what I've done is I've marked all the pieces with a cabinet maker's triangle. So this would be towards the front of the table, this would be the back. So as long as I drill the holes on the inside here, where the inside of the triangle, I'm good to go. So you can see I've already drilled those, so that worked out all right. So we're going to put that aside. I'm going to keep one of these shorter ones here. I like to use a corded drill for this because the cordless seems to struggle a little bit doing it, but the corded drill works really good. So as long as I got the inside of the board to the jig, I'm good. What I do is I put this other piece up here like this, a shorter one, because this clamp would only fit on part of there, and I got it up against the stop. So I just push that down here. Everything's locked in place, so we'll go ahead and start up the vacuum and drill these holes out. All right, there we go. We got the pocket holes drilled in the inside of this shelf support rails. So now what I'm going to do is, these are the upper rails, and I got them marked. So we're going to go ahead and we'll reset the stop, and then we'll drill the holes in these pieces. Top rails were looking pretty plain, so I thought I'd put a 1/2 inch bead on the bottom of each one of them. I got a little rambunctious and actually run all the parts through the router table before I actually decided to do any video. So this is my test piece. I'm just doing another cut on the other side. It was pretty straightforward. The actual pieces only have one bead on them. That's just, like I said, that's a test piece with two. So in a minute here I'll show one of the side rails and what it looks like. Well, it's finally time to screw this base of this table together. So what I have is a right angle clamp holding the top rail on. I got some 1/8 inch spacers I made out of some walnut. I wanted an 1/8 inch reveal on the between the leg and the rail on the outside, so it's just a matter of putting that in there. I have a spacer as well that spaces the shelf rail down from the top rail so I can get some consistency. It was pretty straightforward. Well, now that we have the one of the side pieces fit together, I can lay out the taper on the bottom of this leg. Leaving it the way that it is, I think it looked a little too clunky or whatever. I want to leave this part straight down to the shelf. I think that'll be fine. But below the shelf, I want to taper it down to a smaller foot size at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is start about maybe 1/4 inch below the bottom of the shelf rail, and we want to go down to about 3/4 inch. It's going to be tapered on the inside face, so we need to leave 3/4 inch or so on this side, and we're going to call it right about there. So what I do is take a straight edge and go from this point to this point. So we'll start there and go down to there. And make sure we get it lined up as close as we can. It's not an exact science, but I'll do that. And draw our line. Make sure we got the okay. I'm not sure how well it's showing up on the camera, but that's the taper, and we're going to take out this part right here. And we're going to taper that on this inside leg there, and then on the inside of the side leg. So all the tapers will be on the inside of the leg. So I think that'll lighten that up a little bit and make it look a little bit better. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a jig for the table saw so we can cut these tapers. To taper these legs, it was worth making a jig. So what I have is a piece of MDF. I've extended the taper line down across the end of the blank and across the face, and I just line those up with the edge of that MDF. And then I take another piece of MDF and screw it on as a fence. I needed a stop block to keep the leg from moving around, so I just got another little piece of MDF there that I'm going to screw so that it's touching the bottom of the leg to keep everything in place. I'll hold the leg down onto the jig while we're cutting it. I got a adjustable clamp there. That's one of those self-adjusting things, so I'm just screwing it to the MDF, and then it'll hold that leg down when we're running it through the saw. Time to go to the table saw and taper these legs. So I'll just run the first side through. I got a rip blade in the saw. Once that blade stops, we'll get that piece out, rotate it. I put a little piece of double stick tape on the bottom and try to hold that end piece down a little bit. It kind of worked. I don't know, it didn't work that great, but it helped, I'm sure. So I just cut those 2 tapers and we're good to go. It's time to put this base together. I have a 1/8 inch spacer clamped to the outside of the rail, that way I can keep an 1/8 inch reveal. And that's just a matter of putting in the pocket screws and screwing everything together. Putting the shelf rails on was pretty much the same thing. They're a little more difficult because they're up in the air, but I made a couple of spacers that I can rest on the rail on. I put my shims on the outside so I can get my reveal. And then when I got those on there, I went ahead and put a pipe clamp on it to squeeze everything together and hold it there while I put the screws in. Here's the base all put together. All we need to do now is make a top and a shelf, and we'll be good to go. I need 2 boards to make the top, but they were a little over 6 inches wide, and it was too wide for my jointer. So I ripped the boards in half at the bandsaw, and then I'm just gluing everything back together here. So even though it looks like there's 4 pieces, there was actually 2 boards that have been ripped. Now the glue's dried, we need to sand one side flat. I put on what Charles Neal would call a trace coat, which is just some diluted brown dye. That helps when you sand it. You can see if you're getting it flat, if there's any high or low spots. So if you've not watched any of Charles Neal's videos, I'd highly recommend you search for him on YouTube and watch a lot of them. He's got a lot of great tips and projects on YouTube. And once I had one side flat, we just went ahead to one of my favorite tools, a drum sander, and just cleaned up the other side. Cutting the top to length and squaring the end is a 2-step process. First I'm going to measure the length and then square a line. And then take the jigsaw and we're going to cut that off, leaving the line. And then I'll put a straight edge on it and we'll flush it up with a router and a flush trim bit. The shelf needs to be notched to fit around the legs, so the first step is to go to the table saw with a stop block on the miter gauge, and then I can, second part is to go to the bandsaw and actually trim off that piece that's in the corner there, and we'll have our notches for the leg. It's time to screw the top to the base. The top had a little bit of a bow in it, so I put a piece across the center to pull it down flush, and then I went ahead with some pocket screws and screwed it down. I probably put way too many pocket screws on it, but better too many than not enough, I suppose. It certainly is not going to come off. The shelf was the same thing. I used a Craig micro jig on this so I could use some shorter screws, so they didn't, because the rail was only just a little over 1.25 inches wide, so the shorter screws worked out better. I needed to make a jig to route out the area for the tile in the top, so I just used some MDF and some pocket screws, and I sized it to fit so that the tile has a little bit of room top and bottom, and a little bit of room left and right, just in case the top decides to move at all. The pattern bit I was using to cut this was a little longer than it needed to be. It would have cut the groove too deep if I would have used just one piece of MDF on the jig, so I just basically made a second layer and screwed it to the first one to make the jig a little bit thicker. The pattern bit I was using has a bearing on top, so it needed it right against the jig. In hindsight, I probably should have just took the top off and clamped it down someplace to a table. It was kind of rocky. This was not a very wide table, so it was just a matter of running the bit along the jig and repositioning a clamp so I could finish making the outside edge of this tile inlay. With that outside edge defined, it's just a matter of hogging out the waste in the center. I made a little auxiliary base for my plunge router, and it's just a matter of going down the table and taking out the wood. I had to do it in 2 passes because it was too much to remove in one, so it took a little time, but it turned out okay. I put a couple of different roundovers on the top. On the top edge of the top, I use an 1/8 inch roundover bit with the trim router. And on the bottom edge of the top, I use a 1/4 inch roundover. I didn't show it, but it's pretty much the same thing. I used a different router because it was a little bit bigger bit, but it gave it a nice profile on the top and bottom edges. Well, after I profiled the edges of the top, I took the table all apart and I broke all the edges with some sandpaper, and then sanded everything to 180. I'm putting on a oil-based stain. This is a Minwax product. It's called Early American. Jim wanted a color that was close to an antique dresser he has in his living room area, so this was pretty close to that once we checked it out. Once I got the stain on it and it dried good, I put on 4 coats of a wipe-on satin polyurethane. Here's the finished product, and overall I think it came out pretty nice. Well, that's how I made Jim's hall table. It was a fun project. I think it came out pretty nice. Jim's happy with it. Looks great in his house, and I thank him for giving me the opportunity to make that for him. Thanks for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, please give me a thumbs up. If you'd like to get notified of my future videos, please go ahead and subscribe.